Welcome, dear readers. You're listening to Time to Read, a Winnipeg Public Library podcast. We are recording in the epic and silent Carol Shields Auditorium in the wonderful Millennium Library here in Treaty 1 territory, and on land that is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Today, we will be discussing Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. I'm Alan Chorney, the branch head librarian at Transcona Library, and to my left is...
I'm Erica Ball. I'm the librarian at Fort Garry Library. And across the table from me is...
I'm Trevor. I'm the once and future branch head of the Louis Riel Library.
And my name is Kirsten, and I can be found over at the West End Library.
Libraries all over the place.
A good book can carry me away from an average and ordinary day, yeah. So keep it down, leave me alone, close the doors and turn off the phone, 'cause all I ever really need is a little more time to read.
And of course, we couldn't do this without you, dear readers. It's your questions and comments that get us started. So email us at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. And boy, have we got some good ones this week from you listeners. And remember, only you can determine whether we laugh or cry. There will be spoilers, so each month be sure you find Time to Read the selected book so you can find Time to Read on iTunes, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast service. We want to talk about what you want to talk about, so send us your thoughts, comments, anytime to wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca or find us on social media, and we'll incorporate your thoughts onto the air. Make sure you stick around to the end for our special segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds. But first, Kirsten is going to give us a brief bio that highlights the career of Rainbow Rowell, followed by Erica, who will spoil everything with a brief synopsis. So if you haven't read Eleanor and Park and would like us to wait, press pause now.
So, Rainbow Rowell was born in 1973 and is an American author of both young adult and adult novels. And she currently also writes the 2017 revival of Marvel Comics' Runaways. She's from Omaha, Nebraska, where she worked as a newspaper columnist and ad copywriter for about 15 years before publishing her first novel in 2011. Growing up, when asked by anybody what she wanted to be, she would always say a librarian. In school, in school, she wrote a poem about gorillas watching soap operas, which was very well received by her teachers and classmates. And it was then that writing became something she could feel confident about. Like Eleanor, Rowell was also turned on to comics by a boy who lived near her, and they would read them together on the bus. She completed her first draft of the novel Fangirl during National Novel Reading Month, or NaNoWriMo, in November 2012. NaNoWriMo is a challenge where participants write every day in November and attempt to complete a 50,000-word manuscript during that time. And Winnipeg Public Library also hosts such spaces for NaNoWriMo and events during November annually. So if Rainbow Rowell can do it, maybe you can too. Rowell also makes playlists as she writes a book, and she associates each scene that she writes with a specific song, which then acts as an emotional anchor to the scene. And she's made a playlist, and we will have a link to that playlist on our show notes. She made one for Eleanor and Park, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that later. Rowell has also become a free speech defender and frequently speaks on the subject of banned books, especially after Eleanor and Park was challenged by parents in Minnesota who demanded her book be pulled from the library shelves for profanity. The book remained on the shelves, but Rowell was disinvited to a library event, which ironically was held during Banned Book Week. She says there is nothing about her that should surprise anyone, since she tweets all of her secrets.
Nice bio.
Take us away, Erica.
Okay, so if you listened to the last podcast, you may remember that we're not super fond of genre labeling dictating our reading habits. There was a discussion about Ocean at the End of the Lane and YA fiction. So even though Eleanor and Park at the library, we have it in the YA section, it's one book that I think pretty much every adult should read, well, at least any adults who remember high school. So... Oh, and another aside is I love the stuff being written in YA and middle grade fiction right now because it speaks so directly to so many of the things that we should be talking about, like some of the stuff in this book. So anyway, Eleanor is new at a school and highly conspicuous with her bright red hair and patchwork clothes, making her a target for bullying. When she gets on the bus for the first time, it's that horrible moment of where to sit, and she ends up next to Park, himself just a less conspicuous misfit among his family and peers. Though at first they don't even speak, Eleanor and Park slowly realize there's a strong empathy between them. They share comics, books, music, and then more personal things. This new relationship helps them confront and handle bullying at school, family disapproval, and finally Eleanor's unsafe home life. It's a book about how finding someone who gets you can change your life and can give you the courage to openly be who you really are.
There's so much to talk about with this book.
I'm so glad, because I think I was the one that suggested this book, and I'm really happy that we feel like there's lots to talk about.
Yeah, I think it was you. Yeah.
So why did you suggest this book, Trevor?
Well, I first heard of this book through a woman called Linda Holmes, who is a host of Pop Culture Happy Hour, which is an NPR podcast, and she was singing its praises. So I read it and absolutely fell in love with it. And I passed it on or mentioned it to another friend, and that friend read it. I think the two of us exchanged close to about 60 emails talking about, what about this scene and this scene, and what about when this happens, what about this, and isn't this great? And so, that would have been about 2 or 3 years ago, shortly after it came out. And then I just reread it again, recently, and it really holds up for me. So that's my history with that book.
Anyone else know, or any stories about why this book caught their interest?
Well, I mean, I read it because it was part of the book podcast book club, but I was just away for a couple weeks, and I couldn't carry a physical book with me. So this is the first time that I've listened to an audiobook, believe it or not. And actually,
sacrilege.
I listen to podcasts and things, but it's the first, and actually I couldn't finish listening to the whole audio book. I had to switch to the ebook on my iPhone because I just found the audio book, and I know it's award-winning, but I just found it way too much in my ears, way too intense, and the voices, and it just didn't...
Do they have different voices for different characters?
Yeah. Both Park and Eleanor.
One of those all-out productions.
Yes,
right, with
yes.
sound effects. And,
yes, and there was lots of sort of whispering like this. And I don't know, it was just a bit much.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was an interesting experience for me to not really love the audiobook, but then I got into the ebook.
Well, yeah, it's definitely the case if you're used to reading.
Yep.
If you're making the voices in your own head.
Exactly. And I think I
very
started
different to
reading
try
it
to do
first,
audiobooks.
and then I listened to it. Yeah.
Well, and just on that topic, I had the reverse experience with last month's book, Ocean at the End of the Lane, where I started by listening to Neil Gaiman's read his own audiobook. And what was really cool is the way he delivers phrases, he has sort of almost like a lilting, slower pace of reading that I would read. But it made the book feel a little fuller for me because there was space between the sentences. And so I listened to about half of it. And then when I went to read the rest of it, I could only hear his voice in my head. And I was actually reading at a slower pace using his inflections and stuff. So in that case, the audiobook worked for me. But I'd like to hear, it's interesting to hear your experience with it.
I bet Neil Gaiman actually was in your head. You know how he's into dark fantasy, occultish stuff like that. That's probably why he's so popular.
Yeah.
He cast a spell on you. Yeah. For me, Eleanor and Park, I didn't know a lot about it, but it's one of those books where the title just jumps out at me. I think it's a great title. I think it sounds wonderful. And I'm based on the title alone, I was excited when Trevor suggested this book.
See, and I felt the exact opposite way. I have this thing about generic titles where there's just a person's name or something like that. And it actually turned me off. And the cover kind of turned me off too, because I'm it's going to be, their playlist or something like that, because they're listening to music together on the bus.
Are you telling me? Are you telling me that Erica and Alan are disagreeing on something?
We may be disagreeing this time. It's never happened before.
But I think in
except
terms
lots
of
times.
names, it's such a perfect names. Like, you couldn't just pick any two names and have it be a great book
the
title.
names are perfect for the characters.
If it were like, Gretchen and Harold or something like that, I don't think it would be as great a title. But just the 3 syllables in Eleanor and the 1 syllable in Park.
It has a beautiful sound when you say Eleanor and Park.
Yeah.
Yes, like cellar door.
Exactly.
Yeah, cellar door. Yes.
But why did you guys think that they chose the title Eleanor and Park? Because I have a theory for it.
We love theories.
Go ahead.
I think it's just a reference to Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah. As soon as you said
It's a little obvious, isn't it?
Just a little bit, but it took
I
me a
didn't
while.
think of it.
No.
Yeah.
But it's funny you should say that, because they do study Romeo and Juliet in English class for a bit, and they were talking. I remember there was a discussion where they're talking about, well, why did Romeo and Juliet last? And I think maybe it was Eleanor that came up with. She said, well, I think it's because it's either Eleanor or Park. I can't remember. Chances are one of them. But it said something like, the reason it lasted is because it reminds people about what it feels like being young and in love.
Yeah.
And for me, that's what
Park.
That was Park.
Who said that? Yeah, because I think then he was also like, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because he was always so unsure.
Yeah, and to me, that's what Eleanor, this book does. It reminds me of what it felt like to be young and in love, especially for the first time.
Yeah.
And what a feeling that is. And
yeah. There was some definite, the intensity of it sometimes for me felt a little bit over the top, especially in the audiobook.
The whispers.
But some of the description of some of that sort of first time love stuff, and I know there's been lots talked about the hand holding for the first time, but oh my goodness, it totally took me back to the first time I ever held.
Disintegrated.
Yes, disintegrate was the word. I wrote that down in my notes.
Eleanor,
you hold the hand and you're like, oh my God, this is
I'm
like
not a person anymore.
I've kind of just turned into vapor.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was there for it.
But that was, I don't know if there's anything else we wanted to touch on first, but there was one of our questions that we asked on social media was about characterizing the relationship between Eleanor and Park, and whether, whether was it love? Was it healthy? Was it too intense? We had some really interesting comments from you all sent in to us.
So, Chelsea wrote in, just like you can at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. And she said, I'm going to quote here, "I was so disappointed and disgusted by the time I was finished. Where to start? The story of 2 young teens in love quickly became a tale of obsession and unilateral focus. I was alarmed for any of my students reading this book because it portrayed such an unhealthy relationship. After 4 months of relationship, these kids were already saying that no one else mattered. It got to the point that if the characters committed suicide at the end, I wouldn't have been surprised. It was just so unhealthy and overwhelming and uncomfortable. I found myself cringing more than anything else."
I love that. It's very different from what I feel, but I love it because I totally get it. Especially if she's a teacher, apparently. Mm-hmm. And you see it from the outside, and it's obviously she's also connecting it to Romeo and Juliet and the suicides at the end, and how easily those types of relationships can slip into unhealthy ones.
Real fast.
Because you have nothing to compare it to. It's the first time you're feeling these strong feelings, and your hormones, if you're 15 or 16 or whatever, you're all over the place. And so it's like a perfect storm of everything happening.
Yeah.
And
which makes it so realistic. I mean, this is how it felt, you know, and that intensity. And, I remember, being on the phone with my boyfriend and just and it being dark and late at night, exactly how she describes it. And, talking about Joshua Tree and him crying at the other end. And I was weeping, and it was all so intense and emotional and beautiful. And oh my God, this is all that existed in the world.
Yes. Nothing else mattered. There were no other people. Yeah. It doesn't matter what anybody else says.
But I think looking back at it as an adult, I definitely see some of the cringeworthiness and some ding, ding, ding warning bells in the relationship, where it's oh boy, if I knew what I know now and was in one of their situations, I might have been, you know what, I'm going to back away, or at least talk about things differently. So, the library higher-ups called me into the meeting last month and said, "Alan, Time to Read is 4 episodes in, and you've yet to do a promo spot." I knew it was coming, so I was ready when they said, "We'd like you to do a promo on the virtues of ebooks." Look, I said, and paused for dramatic effect. I could do that. I could extol the virtues of overdrive, but why throw fuel on the fire? What fire? They started to say, but I slammed my palms down on the desk. You don't know what it's like out there. I'm out there every day, and every day the book lovers come in and say, we love books. We love the feel of books. We love the smell of books. We would never, ever touch an ebook. And the ebook lovers don't come in because they don't have to. But I know they're at home feeling like superheroes. With ebooks, I'm immune to overdue fees. With ebooks, it's like I'm sneaking into the library after hours. With ebooks, we don't need books. There's a war out there between book lovers and ebook lovers, and I don't want to pick sides. By this point, I was breathing heavy. I could tell by the look in their eyes that the library higher-ups regretted calling this meeting, but they pressed on. So what do you suggest? I paced back and forth across the room, stopped, and pointed a finger at nothing in particular and said, there is another way. I talk about Gary. Gary, they said. Gary comes into the library every 3 weeks to check out a book, and you know what he does with this book? The question was rhetoric, so I didn't give a chance to respond. Gary leaves it in his car because Gary likes the new library book smell. He reads everything else through Overdrive. He likes that it's available on his phone, tablet, and computer. Gary doesn't love ebooks, he likes them. Gary doesn't love books, he likes them. Gary is the third way. Don't talk about Gary, they said. In fact, they said, you should leave the promos to Kirsten, Trevor, Erica, and Dennis. Dennis probably shouldn't have left the recording equipment running. Hashtag book, ebook, book, not mutually exclusive. Hashtag Gary.
What did you guys think about Rainbow Rowell's decision to make it like a period piece that takes place in 1986? Did that work for you? Did that
totally worked for me because I could totally place myself in it. But I thought it was interesting because if she's right, she wrote it in 2013 for a young adult audience. How would so many of those references even make?
They're cool and retro then. Right, cassettes, making
but like
tapes.
so many of the references,
young
like
audiences don't exist. People just read things because they're enjoyable to read.
No, you're right. You're right. But a lot of teens have been reading this, and so what I think is you read it twice, or it's you read it as a teenager, you read it as an adult, and you read it in totally different ways, even. Yeah.
I mean, the falling in love part probably hasn't changed much from the 80s to now.
No, that's right.
But the references to the Smiths and
I want a T-shirt that says madness on it.
See, and as you grow up, like I think that, like I was born in 82, and people call me an 80s child, but I don't really remember the 80s for a long time. Like 80s throwback things were like confusing to me. But as I got older and into music and that sort of thing, like I totally went back and I knew 80 or 90% of the references in this book.
Oh yeah.
And another thing is I'm one of those annoying people that look for inconsistencies when a book is set in a certain year, like 1986. I'm like, did the song come out yet, or that album, or that book wasn't published, and I just got caught up in the story that I did. First of all, I didn't notice any inconsistencies. Like they were. She used the right U2 song for that era. And so I found it really great that way. That's
what did you use to like pinpoint the date? Because I looked for inconsistencies as well, and I couldn't find any. But I was like, how do I know exactly where in the 80s this was? And
how did we know it was 86?
I based it on Short Circuit because they went to go see Short Circuit in the movie theater, and then I went and I looked up when and Trevor's just making us all look silly.
No, not at all. I had to remember myself, but in the very first page it tells us it begins in August 1986. So it goes through the year to 1987. So the Joshua Tree
reference
possibly was right.
Yes. I was going to say that I'd mentioned that Rainbow Rowell makes these playlists as she's writing her books, and the playlist she makes though for Eleanor and Park, it isn't all 80s music. So just be prepared when you're listening to it.
Don't get angry.
Don't get angry, Trevor.
Don't at her at Twitter.
That's right. Modest Mouse wasn't around in 86.
Oh, did she pick a Modest Mouse song?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think there's like Modest Mouse and...
now I have to go check this out. Modest Mouse is like one of my favorite bands.
Yeah, they're XTC, although I think Park was listening to some XTC, wasn't he? Anyway.
It's on the first page. Actually.
Yeah, okay, there we go. But so And also, so you can, on her website, you can listen to every single song. Like she's got like a video for every single song, and she has comments as well. So it's actually very, very interesting to go through. And then you can also, she has a playlist for Eleanor and a playlist for Park. And you can also listen to it on Spotify too.
We'll link to it on our show notes
Absolutely.
on our website.
She would have made a good librarian.
Absolutely.
Can I just say? That list making,
Yes. Yeah.
cross-referencing,
We'll
everything's right there.
tweet at her and tell her what
Yeah.
officially
We
from a group
approve.
of librarians.
I'm sure it'll mean a lot to her.
And I hope her experience of being uninvited to a library event in Minnesota hasn't soured her on librarians.
Well,
No.
yeah, we'll have her here.
sure. Yeah, for
Rainbow
sure.
Rowell,
Out.
Winnipeg, Manitoba loves Rainbow Rowell.
And remember,
do.
I like to invite all of the authors to my house for dinner.
Right, yeah,
So
yeah.
You can come join me and Neil Gaiman
And Colson Whitehead.
Colson Whitehead.
Colson Whitehead was another author that I would always listen to music. Wasn't he? But he had listened to the same
right.
song. Which one was it? David Bowie or Prince or
There
something?
was,
Oh,
there was
yeah.
a Prince and
Or
a David
David Bowie always appears in his books.
Right,
But
right.
there was a Prince song he would play. Like it's a tradition towards the end.
That's
for the
right.
final chapter.
That's
yeah,
right.
Yeah. So I guess
But-
authors have these quirks that they do.
Since we're speaking of music, one of the things we did ask on social media was, what is your favorite 80s song? And we got a great response. So many of you...
The best response we ever got for a question.
So far.
So many answers.
so many answers. So we're just going to read out a few of them. So Michelle said she would have to say her favorite song would be Man Eater by Hall & Oates and Funky Town by Lips Inc., but maybe that's the 70s. I don't know. Trevor, can you weigh in?
I have no knowledge on that. Sounds kind of 70s. Funky and Town put together.
Holly says, how dare you make me choose my favorite Hall & Oates jam from the 80s? They're like my children. They're all very precious to me. I have to, I know there's a lot of Hall, and I don't know any Hall & Oates. Like,
you would recognize
I feel
Yes,
like I
of course
probably
you
would, but yeah.
Did they ever like go solo? Is there just a Hall album and an Oates album?
Probably.
Do a double album where one is just Hall and one is just Oates.
Oh yeah. Whoa.
Mustache versus mustache.
Robin chose Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads.
Oh yeah, that's a great song. Oh
yeah.
man, that's a good song in movie trailers.
Krista wrote in. She said She Sells Sanctuary by The Cult.
Oh,
I
I feel like that's a grade
It's
7
a-
song for me.
That's a song that I listened to until I was just so sick of it because it was in a video game. It was in Gran Turismo 3, and it was like the only song on the soundtrack that I liked. So I just like drove around a racetrack for hours and hours listening to that song. And the last person who wrote in, Lynn, she said Red Red Wine by UB40, which is like, that is my favorite of the written in songs.
So did you not see Instagram?
I know Instagram was like full of them.
This is all the Facebook list.
Let's
Yeah.
hear some of these Instagram songs.
throw
there
this
was
away.
about 1 million.
Yeah,
on
there's
All right.
Instagram.
Eric is
doing.
going to do the Instagram list.
Okay. We had several contributions by Carrie664, who sort of subdivided her lists, her suggestions. So one is Laura Brannigan. Number 1, The Lucky One. Number 2, Self-Control. Number 3, Ti Amo. Then she says Pat Benatar, 1, We Belong. And then she's got a really long list. Okay, ready? Okay. Lee Aaron, 1, Rock Candy. 2, Sweet Talk. 3, What You Do to My Body. Samantha Fox, 1, Touch Me. Roxette, 1, The Look. 2, Listen to Your Heart. Janet Jackson, 1, Rhythm Nation. 2, Black Cat. George Michael, I Want Your Sex.
Sure.
Heart, 1, Alone. Sinead O'Connor, 1, Nothing Compares to You.
Yeah.
I think that was 1990.
I think she might be pushing it with that one, but I didn't look it up.
Okay.
And then she says, Hope you love my choices. And then there's some emoticons. So
We love your choices.
We love your
love your
choices, even if they
Carrie.
may not exactly all be technically 80s songs.
we
Says the stickler Trevor.
we could do songs that I thought were in the 80s.
You know, and before like Google, I could probably get away with that. But now
Yeah,
everyone's
yeah.
listening is going to look up when Sinead O'Connor. Wait, I guess which Sinead O'Connor song was it? Did she
Nothing
say-
compares
Nothing
to you.
compares
Yeah,
to
I
you.
think that was 1990.
we'll look it up and we'll put it in the show notes for you. Okay. And then I'm just going to list the other lots of other people wrote in. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So If this was you, sorry, I'm not going to read all your names, but I'll just go to do the
Sure.
the favorite songs. Madonna, Like a Prayer, Purple Rain, Eurythmics, Sweet Dreams, Betty Davis's Eyes,
Yes.
Betty Davis Eyes.
Betty Davis's
Betty Davis's Eyes.
Betty Davis's eyes.
Like extra syllable.
Come on.
Sorry.
Remix.
It reminds me of that scene in Hot Shots where he gets his father's eyes and they're in a little box that he opens up.
Betty Davis Eyes, Billie Jean by Michael Jackson, Private Dancer by Tina Turner, Welcome to the Jungle by Guns N' Roses,
Sure.
Wake Me Up Before You Go, Wham.
Well, yeah.
That's a hit parade of 80s songs. But Ellen,
Isn't
you
that
were about to
amazing?
say songs that you thought were from the 80s.
I thought were from the 80s. Breakfast at Tiffany's by Deep Blue Something. I thought that was an 80s song for so long.
Oh.
To me, it has that 80s, total 80s vibe to it.
Well, I don't know if you guys are fans of Beck at all, but he has a new album out. I think it's called Colors, and it feels like it's just grabbed right from the 80s. It's like Tears for Fears meets the Thompson Twins.
Oh, both
so
of
good.
those. Oh, my
and it's
God.
super. There's this righteous drum break in the middle of one of the songs where I actually had to pull the car over, where I was just like, I gotta listen to this again. So it just and this album is I don't know how old this album is, like 4 months old, 5 months old.
That's amazing.
So
Okay.
everybody out there, Beck, Colors. Find it on Hoopla. Find it from your library. Steal it from a friend. 80s. But
That
not
sounds amazing.
80s inspired.
80s, but not. Did anybody else have favorite songs they wanted to
All right, we
talk
have
about? We haven't shared
we
ours.
got so many written in. Yeah, don't want to start us off, Erica?
Okay, sure. I have 4.
Okay.
Walk Like an Egyptian by the Bangles.
Very nice.
Time After Time, Cyndi Lauper. I'm guessing Trevor approves. Love Shack, B-52s.
Sure.
Okay. And Faith by George Michael.
Oh, sure. That's a good.
Faith.
Well, I did 2 songs. They're both from the 80s, but one was one that I actually listened to in the 80s, and one that I came to love later, but is actually from the 80s. So the one that I listened to the most and loved the most was Time After Time by Cyndi Lauper.
Yay!
We have a match.
Yeah, so
We have an agreement.
but then this other one feels a bit like a cop-out because I think I was led to this one because of Eleanor and Park, because it's actually mentioned in Eleanor and Park. So, of course, it's a U2 song, and so it's Bad by U2 off of the Unforgettable Fire. And if you can find a live version of that song, it's way better than the album version. It's just like, that's where, like U2 says, live is where we live, and then never is it more true than when you listen to the song Bad. It's just Bono feeding off of the crowd and a call and response, and I'm wide awake at the end. It's perfect. Try to find that, and I think you'll be all right.
All right.
Good suggestions.
I'm going to say another Talking Heads song, which I don't know if it is from the 80s, but I definitely listened to it in the 80s. Psycho Killer?
Time travel.
Yeah.
No, but it might be from
It could be from the
earlier.
70s.
It might be from the 70s.
I thought the same thing you were thinking. How could you
I listened to it before anybody else. Psycho Killer
So
by Talking Heads.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
excellent.
Killer. And that was introduced to me by a boyfriend. So there was this whole kind of connection of like, that I related to this book and, being introduced to these songs that I'd never, ever heard from before. And so whenever I hear that song, I think of Monty. I do. Yeah.
Monty, if you're out there.
Psycho Killer. This
Psycho
is for you.
Killer. Qu'est-ce que c'est? And then I listened to a lot of Trapped Like Rats, which was my other boyfriend's band. And
Is this like Mouse Rat or from Parks and Rec?
Parks and yeah.
Trapped Like Rats. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. Trapped Like Rats. They had this really intense song called Bleed. It was really good.
Gosh. Were they kind of like emo?
The lead singer wore eyeliner, but they weren't really emo, no.
Kind of like the Smiths.
No.
Not the Smiths. What's the Cure I'm thinking of?
Yeah,
Robert
no,
Smith?
no.
Nothing like
Kind
that.
of like Park.
No.
Wearing the eyeliner.
Yes,
just because it looked good.
Finding
yeah.
his way.
Yeah.
So, I have a couple. I don't know that I definitely wasn't into music in the 80s. So any 80s song I knew I listened to after the 80s or maybe before the 80s. So I have 2. Strange Animal by
Gowan?
Oh.
Larry Gowan.
Larry Gowan, which like I just discovered like a month ago, and and it's been like at the top of my playlist ever since. And that music video is amazing.
That's awesome.
Oh my God.
Where he's dancing around with a bone and doing crazy spins. And the other one is Dance Hall Days by Wang Chung,
right?
Which I learned about from the movie about David Foster Wallace, The End of the Tour.
Okay.
Which is such a great movie if you haven't seen it. It's all about a guy from Rolling Stone who went out to interview David Foster Wallace for 2 days, and so it's just about like a 2-day slice in his life. So it's super interesting.
I think Wang Chung is name checked in Eleanor and Park too.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, you could probably put anything Wing Chun on your list of 80s music to listen to.
I never really understood what it was. Everybody have fun tonight. Everybody Wang Chung tonight. So
Yes.
it's also a verb.
Yeah.
They're just giving themselves the shout out is all.
So I'm sure we could talk about 80s music for like a whole episode.
That's right.
We'll have a spin-off podcast.
Yeah. Just
Talking
about 80
80s.
songs.
But so maybe we can get into some of the other questions that
The
we
actual
asked.
content of the book.
Of the
Yes,
book,
we could.
yeah. Well, the book was so 80s, but so we asked, is Eleanor's mother a good mother, and why does she put up with Richie? So
Well, this is something that for me is the big unanswered question of the book, is that it's such a common phenomenon for women and women with children to stay in abusive situations. And it's interesting that it was a part of the book, but not the central part of the book, like so many other things are, bullying and self-image and all these other things. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear if anybody has any theories. Is it self-preservation? Was she too afraid to leave?
I think one of the things that I wish I knew to help answer that question is what happened to Eleanor's father. I feel like we don't. I feel like I want to know how that relationship dissolved and how that left the family situation, because we don't know that, and I think that affects things a little bit, like because he obviously was like out of the picture and didn't want to be a part of Eleanor's life, and affected Eleanor's mother and the whole family dynamic, but we don't really know what their life was like and why they don't have any support from the father and that sort of thing.
Well, and I think throughout the book, I mean, the characters of Eleanor and Park are so well developed to the point of we know about their nerve endings, on their fingertips. But nobody else is really very well developed. Cal, the friend, or even Tina. But then especially like Richie and the mom and the dad. So it's hard to sort of, I guess, understand. But I think that maybe is also realistic because we don't know everybody's story and backstory, and we can't judge why people stay, and because we don't know their story, and we definitely didn't know the story here.
Especially when we're teenagers.
Absolutely.
We don't know our mom's story or our dad's story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and for me, like I focused mostly on the love story between Eleanor and Park throughout this, and I saw the domestic violence part of it as sort of peripheral to the story, but it shows where Eleanor's coming from and maybe why she isn't able to say "I love you," and it's a juxtaposition to say Park, who is raised in a loving family with parents that are supportive. I mean, it's a normal family too, and they have their fights and their disagreements, but just it was comparing those two backgrounds, and then for me was why the domestic violence part was important, but not sort of central to the story. So when we were promoting this podcast, one of I think the Instagram post was all about domestic violence, and I just was surprised by the focus on that, because I didn't focus on it myself when I was reading it.
I think the other thing that plot does for the book is it's one way of explaining Eleanor's reactions to being bullied herself was to ignore it. Whereas Park's reaction to being bullied was to get really mad and fight back. And like, not that that's good or whatever, but
that sort of annoyed me, actually.
Yeah.
The fighting part?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't seem character. Well, I mean, I don't know.
Well,
like the whole sort of toxic masculinity of like, I'm just so mad. I'm gonna punch you.
No,
like,
I could relate to that. I could
relate to it,
and also like when Park's father found out, he was like, "Well, what kind of kick did you use, or whatever, or whatever." Like, I mean, that's
his training.
I mean, he was mad that he used it in attacking and not self-defense, but at the same time, he's like, he kind of wanted to know, you did a reverse kick or whatever, like
that. He was impressed.
Yeah, that he was kind of impressed. I mean, yeah. So, I mean, I could relate to that.
I think a lot of people, not myself maybe, although maybe me, have one good physical fight in them in their lives.
Ooh.
And
this is interesting.
Just an observation that there's usually at least one point in everybody's life where they're willing to do that sort of thing.
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting, like, because you can say that, obviously you shouldn't fight, but that's something that's, like Erica says, like, is a part of people that they have to work to overcome. And that's part of what society is, I think, is learning how to deal with those, like, complex emotions that make you want to punch a wall,
or punch a Steve.
Yeah.
It just seemed so.
It wasn't really in keeping with other parts of the book.
Yeah, and I don't know. It just seemed like such an easy reaction to describe Park having.
Yeah.
But
that's Park was a flawed character as well.
Yes,
and part of his flaws are that he doesn't deal with things in a straightforward way until
full of self-doubt.
He's full of self-doubt. Yeah. He never, it seems, stood up for himself, but when it was Eleanor being picked on, that's when he stood up. And I think maybe if his younger brother had been bullied or something, maybe that's what would have made him stand up before. So maybe that's why he was sort of in character.
Well, and his dad was certainly very sort of aggressive and...
Yeah, well, I think it maybe goes on, we see Park learn on how to deal with things, because at the end he instead of fighting, he decides to take Eleanor to safety. And I think maybe that shows a bit of growth on Park's character.
He doesn't kick Richie.
Right, he has that one final confrontation with Richie.
So like he has more than just one big fight in him.
Yeah, but
he didn't kick him in the head.
No, I know. In front of his head.
I know.
Yeah.
I just don't buy it that everybody that and it shows the men in this book are all reacting so angrily. Like, I just don't buy it that out of the three guys sitting around this table that it would come to that. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I'm Irish, and so we have 600 years of fight in us.
Fighting.
So at least 600.
Today's book choice, Eleanor and Park, bring up some major themes of family violence, addiction, and mental health. Did you know that Winnipeg Public Library has information guides related to these issues, as well as numerous other useful topics? The guides are meant to help connect people with reliable, authoritative, and trustworthy information, and the information shared range from basic introductions to resources for doing more in-depth research. You can find a list of all of our information guides by going to winnipeg.ca/library and tapping the Info Guides button on our homepage. Then choose from 25 guides, including our Mental Health and Addictions Info Guide, our Health Info Guide, and much more. If you're looking for specifics about crisis and family violence shelters and services, Winnipeg Public Library staff have gathered information and developed a set of handouts that are available either to download and print off or can be picked up at your local branch. The handouts list crisis and support lines, adult shelters, warming centers, youth crisis services and shelters, mental health crisis response centers, and mobile crisis services, family violence shelters. The goal of these handouts is to help make crisis support information less overwhelming to find and to learn about. They are meant as a reliable resource to help people begin to access these kinds of services. Remember, you are not alone, and help is out there. One other thing with the dad, and when Park decided to then go take her away and drive her to go on this road trip, and then Park's dad said, take the truck, which he knew that Park hasn't been able to drive. So what was that all about? I mean, because then Park did it. You know, he was able to drive, so maybe the dad knew all along.
I think that's what the dad knew he could drive that car.
See, I didn't like
he had
the
to get
dad,
over
so
his-
I was like,
Oh,
You didn't like
that
the
was
dad?
my
No, I
that was my
didn't.
that
That's
was
what-
my favorite part in the book
yeah.
when the dad was like, "This is what you need to do.
Yeah.
Go do it."
The dad knew
Yeah.
that it was performance anxiety in front of him that was getting to Park, and that's why it made him so mad.
I also really like the part with the dad where he was like, Eleanor, I'm tired of inviting you for supper.
Yeah, that was
so
good.
let's just assume that you're always welcome. I love that part too,
Yeah.
because it was just like, it sounded like it was going to go another way. And the dad was up front and with his,
but he was sort of aggressively upfront.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
He's an aggressive kind of guy.
well, sure.
Yeah,
He looked like
yeah.
Tom Selleck.
That's right. I forgot.
Everybody loved the dad. I did.
Oh no, I didn't. I did not love the
It's
dad.
okay. It's
Oh,
okay.
no.
to
I
disagree.
related to the dad. Doesn't mean I liked him.
Okay.
I thought he
No,
was
okay.
the best, like one of the best sub characters in the
Okay.
book.
Yeah. No, I liked the part at the end where when he kind of like he has some moments when he steps up, but I
Well,
I
because
could not say that I liked
because
the
the dad knew Richie, right? They grew up together, so he
Yeah.
knew he was like bad news
Right.
too. So he knew what kind of danger Eleanor was in. I think so, and he loved Eleanor. Like I think he loved the idea that she was this kid who his son also like she became almost part of their family in a way. I thought spending Christmas there and these big holidays and there's a lot to that dad. I thought I liked him.
Yeah, he
But
was
no
complex.
eyeliner.
No eyeliner.
Yeah,
No,
the
no,
eyeliner.
no. That was too a step too
Much.
far.
Too much.
Should we look at the end of the book?
Oh,
The
the famous
The 3 words.
The 3 words on the postcard.
Right.
I read a story somewhere that apparently at one of the early book signings, Rainbow Rowell was asked by a fan what the 3 words were, and she told them, and they seemed super disappointed. And so at that point, she said, "You know what? Screw it. I'm not going to say what the 3 words are."
No.
Yeah. So that's
One
the story.
person
Yeah.
to blame.
So just I heard
On
that
her
story.
website too,
she's talking
there's
about that? Okay.
there's lots of questions on there, and one of the questions is the 3 words, and actually because I've gone on the website a few times, and actually the answer changes. So once it was smell you later, and the other one was get a job. So it changed.
That's
so
funny.
yeah.
That's super clever.
Well, before we give our thoughts on what we think the 3 words are about, we did have another person email in, a loyal listener of ours, regarding the 3 words. So if shall I just read out what she had
absolutely.
to say? She said, I don't believe Eleanor would write "I love you" on a postcard and send it to Park. I don't think she'd write it in a sealed letter either. I think she was testing the waters since she had cut him off so abruptly and he had eventually stopped writing to her. It could have been as simple as, "Thank you, Park," or one of their inside jokes. First, I thought it was strange that she'd send a postcard since she's so private. It could mean that she is feeling safer and less guarded as she settled in Minnesota. I loved Eleanor and Park, and I'm looking forward to your discussion.
Thanks, loyal listener.
Whoever you are.
I agree with her. I think it might be an inside joke with the two of them, and that's my theory. But if anyone else
Like a
wants
song lyric or something.
Well, do you want me to go first with my thoughts?
Yeah, you
okay.
go.
Okay. Well, you know how they were always reading The Watchmen back and forth, and then right towards the end of the book, they mentioned that the last issue comes out, and Dr. Manhattan uses the words "nothing ever ends."
Oh.
And so I thought that would show that
that's it.
That is it.
That would show that she kept reading The Watchmen, because she would have to have bought it on her own, right? Because they were apart for a year. And that not only does that show that she was reading it, but almost her way of saying, "Hey, let's resume," or
Yeah.
"I'm in your life again," or something. So to me, that's my theory. I don't
I like
know,
it.
but that's.
I have 3 words for you, Trevor. We missed you.
Well, I think that's a
Bless.
brilliant theory, because their last conversations were about having other chances to be together, and is this the end, and is it goodbye, and all this stuff.
But
So
now, just to counter argument
To yourself?
to myself, I'm Jeff Goldbluming here for a second. He does. The book does talk about how Park thinks of song lyrics when he reads those 3 words, and those aren't song lyrics. So possibly could they be song lyrics too? So I'm just throwing that in, saying that I'm not 100% on that, but it's something hopeful anyway, isn't it? It's something.
Yeah.
that's a good
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
I'd love to hear what you guys think.
I don't know that I had like 3 specific words. I didn't think they were "I love you," and so when the listener wrote in and she said "Thank you, Park," I was like, oh yeah, I was like, that's really insightful, and I could see that, because I think it goes to like the bigger question of like, will they get together again? And I don't think that they will.
I don't think they will either.
Yeah, this was a moment in time that was special and intense and temporary.
Yeah. And I mean, long lasting.
The feeling.
Yeah,
your first love, for sure. That carries with you all the way through, even if it actually doesn't.
Well, I totally thought it was "I love you" until I thought about it more. I thought it was, especially when we got this email, I'm like, yeah, that's right. She wouldn't write "I love you." That would totally be out of character. Yeah. So then I thought, what would Eleanor have actually written? And I think it was probably something more like "You are lame," or something in response to his many letters on a postcard.
Because they had that great Gilmore Girls style banter back and forth.
Yeah, and she was always telling him he was dork and that he was lame. And I checked in their last conversation, she does say something like "that's lame" or something like that. So that was my feeling until I heard Trevor's theory, and now I'm pretty sure that that's the one. So
well, Rainbow and that one fan out there are the only 2 people that know the truth.
Yeah.
What did you guys think of Eleanor in general? Did you like her as a character?
I did. I kept getting the feeling, and there was something in Kirsten's bio as well, that a lot of this book was written from real life. And I think some of the parts of Eleanor and what she goes through and feeling as an outcast and stuff like this was maybe written from life. And she seemed like a lot of the people that I knew and that I know, and especially the way she reacts to things with that sort of like sarcastic defense mechanism. Yeah. And when you're a teenager and everything's dumb anyway, and just staring off into space at school instead of dealing with whatever. So I really liked Eleanor as a character. Yeah. Although red hair, I'm getting kind of tired of red hair on protagonists. every special woman in literature has red hair. Just notice that.
You think the gingers are overrepresented?
I think they might be the like feisty female protagonists. Like maybe they could just be brunette.
I wonder, does Rainbow Rowell have red hair? Biography lady?
No, but so. She does have the big curly hair.
But I take your point, Erica. I take your point. Yes.
You'll start noticing it now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I thought Eleanor was a bit of a jerk sometimes.
Well,
that's her protective shell, her protective mechanism.
I see, but then
I think there were bigger jerks in this story.
I could see that though. But then there's the one scene where she comes home and her sister has found her stuff and has made a mess out of everything, and she tells her sister, if you would have just asked, I would have let you use it. And her sister calls her out liar. And then Eleanor to herself was like, she was right. And I'm like, oh, that's
how siblings.
Especially sisters. I was going to say that's sisters.
Yeah, for sure.
Still a jerky thing to do.
Yeah. Reality.
So, which goes down to like which points her out as a flawed character. It's definitely not the heroic thing to do, in like a bad.
You have high standards for your heroes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I do not. I'm like, you're a regular person. You can be my hero.
And the way that
just like me, so I can be a hero too.
Maybe I want to feel like I'm a hero.
Did anyone else feel like worried for Eleanor's well-being throughout the entire book? Because the first paragraph or so, remember, is like a flash forward to Park saying, I'm looking for her everywhere, I'm not finding her, or blah blah blah, whatever. And so I thought maybe she died, or so I was so relieved at the end that it wasn't a sad ending.
What you thought was sort of foreshadowing, with like the Romeo and Juliet references, and then that thing at the very beginning, and so I did have that worry that whole time,
which kind of drove me to read it. Like it was a page turner, because I was like, this thing better not end badly. This thing better. I'm so invested in these darn kids,
Well, for me, as soon as the first time that she wakes up. She wakes up and she hears her mom crying or something, and you start to get a real idea of how bad things are in that house. That's when I started. That's when that like thrillerness of the book kind of crept in, and I'm like, how is this going to end?
Like when she got out and she went to the garage with Richie and Tina, like that
Or
part,
even before that.
Yeah.
No, this was like really early in the book.
Okay,
The first time she wakes up, she can hear her mom crying or something in the other room.
Okay, yeah.
And she's like, and you really get the idea that something's wrong.
Yeah.
I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a bad situation. I also, I liked Eleanor and I related to her too. I also dressed weird in the 80s.
I dressed super weird in high school.
Like boxer shorts and long johns.
Oh yeah, we started the whole plaid pajama pants to school thing when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So
years after me, I would like to just decades maybe.
Some things transcend time and space.
You were the Samuel de Champlain of weird clothes.
I wore a bathtub chain around my neck with a bronze cross hanging off of it.
Whoa! No, you didn't.
I totally did. And not like a bronze cross, like the life-saving award is what I wore around my neck.
It's confession time.
How bad did you dress?
How bad did you dress?
Well, that wasn't badly dressing. That was.
I did that thing where you take your pants and you pull them and then you roll the bottoms, but in a super tight roll. Does anyone ever remember doing that? I think I'm just slightly
I feel like
older.
I still do that. What?
I'm just like slightly older than you guys. I'm pointing to Erica and Alan, and slightly younger than you, Kirsten. I had a niche look that no one here. It lasted for a while. But yeah, I would take my pants and I would actually roll them up. So
roll the pant legs?
Roll the pant leg up so I kind of look like Tintin.
Oh, that's what it is. You just want to look like Tintin.
But I did that all through high school.
Pulled up really high?
No, not high in the waist, high in the sock.
Okay.
So that my sock was revealed. And
then did you wear like plaid socks?
Not like plus fours or whatever those things are called.
Socks?
Like, it wasn't that high, but like high enough that you could see the sock.
Okay,
so
no, I like
why
it.
Socks have good designs on them. You're supposed to roll here.
Yeah. So I tried to get my pants extra long, so I had good rolling. I had room to roll.
Very good.
The big cuff was in.
The cuff.
That's right.
That's the word I'm looking for.
So before we move on to our...
I have another fashion thing that No.
We've all come through it quite well, haven't we?
Before we move on to the read-alikes, any final thoughts on Eleanor and Park that you guys want to air your grievances now?
I was going to say, I just loved one part where she was all confused about the bases afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure if I've even been to all the bases. And I'm a married man.
I think it's one of those things that everybody's like.
And
thinks.
you love baseball.
I love baseball. Oh, I have to tell you, there's this great moment. It's a John Hodgman joke, but he talked about in baseball before 1969 or whatever the year was, that in baseball, when the player got to first base, he actually did have to hold hands with the player. And then they go around, but then the players' union came in and they changed the rules. So anyway, that's going to throw that in. Sorry.
That's good.
Yeah, the bases. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure. We don't have to go over them in explicit detail, but maybe afterwards you guys can explain it to me.
Yeah.
No demonstrations. Erica?
Yeah, I wanted to second the idea that my only hesitation with the book was in the degree of their fixation on each other. And again, like we said, that's realistic for when you're in it. But it's also something that, as somebody witnessing it, you can see personalities change, and you can see these relationships have these huge effects on kids. So that was the only thing about the book that I didn't absolutely love, was that there was that middle part with this sort of scene after scene of how intense they are together. But like I said at the beginning, I think this is a wonderful book for anybody who remembers high school or who survived high school to go to and remember what that felt like, for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
Awesome. I just want to go back to the idea of the mixtape and using a mixtape to fall in love with somebody or to woo somebody. Either that doesn't work or I am the worst mixtape maker.
Oh, shoot.
It's incredibly tricky.
It is tricky. It is an art.
Are you getting ready to write an essay or paper on something that's in the news, but having some trouble figuring out how to approach it? Are
Are you trying to come to grips with a complicated social issue, but you're not sure you understand where people are coming from when they talk about it? Maybe you could use another point of view. Winnipeg Public Library offers access to the Canadian Points of View database, a collection of resources that present multiple sides of an issue and can help students develop persuasive arguments and essays, better understand controversial issues, and develop analytical thinking skills. The database covers over 400 topics, each of which has an overview, a point or argument, and a counterpoint or opposing argument. Each topic features a guide to critical analysis, which helps the reader evaluate the controversy and enhances students' ability to read critically, develop their own perspective on the issues, and write or debate an effective argument on the topic. Whether you're trying to figure out what the issues around Bitcoin are, or how cities should be dealing with ride-sharing services like Uber, Canadian Points of View can give you a solid foundation from which to build your own arguments and opinions. Categories include bioethics, Indigenous peoples, citizens' rights, the environment, global issues, health and medicine, media, social issues, technology, women's issues, and more. To access this service, go to our website, winnipeg.ca/library, and click on the Databases button. Scroll down to Canadian Points of View on the list provided, click it, and enter your library card information. Once inside, you'll see some highlighted topics that have been in the news, a listing of different topics by category, and a search bar. Happy writing!
So now it's time for Read-Alikes Roundtable, or as we like to call it here, Can You Tell Me a Book You Would Also Like?
Sure. I have one that I feel is a really awesome book. It's not a read-alike in any way, shape, or form. It's just the book that this led me to read.
I think that's a trend here with our read-alike.
Yeah.
In the best way possible.
I could come up with a bunch of books that are similar in content or similar in tone, or that you will for sure love if you love this book. But the one that I want to talk about is called Dietland by Saray Walker, and it's adult fiction. Like, it's not in the YA section. Like, that doesn't mean anything. Don't get mad at me, Alan. But
No, I don't think YA means anything.
Okay. But one of the reasons I picked it up was because of the teasing that Eleanor had for being big. And when I read the synopsis for or what they call big for this book, it's about, well, here, I wrote up my synopsis for it. So, okay, so I picked it up because I'm always intrigued by other points of view and reading about perspectives that I don't have experience from myself. And there seems to be this wonderful insurgence or resurgence of women writing about their bodies and what's considered healthy, what's considered attractive, and how that's changing. So Dietland is about Plum Kettle, who is conspicuous for her size. It says at one point that she's 300 pounds. And she gets found by a group of subversive women at the same time that a mysterious entity named Jennifer begins terrorizing companies that mistreat women by kidnapping their CEOs and demanding things like no more topless women in the newspaper and no more porn mags at the chain grocery stores and all the train stations. This takes place in England. And it's actually really hilarious. Jennifer demands that I'm doing air quotes around Jennifer, you can't see, demand that they switch the female nudie mags to softcore gay male porn mags. And all of a sudden, all the men are too intimidated to go into the store. And the whole dynamic changes of like who feels comfortable and who does not feel comfortable. So while the world is reacting to this, Plum is going through her own transformations in the way she sees everything. Other women start taking other things into their own hands. And so it's a book not just about diet industry, but on taking on the beauty industry, gender equality, and all the other ways that the world mistreats women. And this is the best description of it, is that it's just a revenge fantasy. Like, it's a pure on revenge fantasy for women. And it was interesting. It's especially interesting because it was written published in 2015. So before some of this resist stuff that we're seeing now, and it's also being made into a show. So once again, that is Dietland by Saray Walker is my suggestion for the next book?
I've written it down here for me to put on
maybe
hold.
we could do. I don't know. Maybe we should do it as a
link.
podcast. But
We'll put a link on the show notes.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Find them. Oh, sorry.
oh.
Find them at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca.
Find all the extra content there. And so actually taking a page from Erica's book, my read-alike isn't exactly a read-alike. It's more like further reading. So I picked The Watchmen by Alan Moore, which comes up again and again throughout the book as this comic book that was coming out month by month. But now in the fullness of time, looking back at the 80s, The Watchmen is considered a seminal, really important comic that deconstructs the whole idea of superhero comics. But I do feel a little disingenuous recommending it because I personally don't like it.
Ooh.
And
Sacrilege.
I find it so hard to read. If I was going to recommend an Alan Moore, I would prefer V for Vendetta for its style and its story, or for just pure fun, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, where he takes classic literary characters like Mina Murray from Dracula and Captain Nemo and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and the Invisible Man and makes like a super team like the Avengers, but it all takes place in the 1800s and it's really fun. So that would be my real The Watchmen, but not really.
I will say that I will praise The Watchmen. I think it is fantastic, and it did make time. I think it was Time's top 100 novels of all time. It was the only graphic novel that made it on that list.
I admire it, but I don't like it.
I sort of forgot about this segment, but I'm going to be totally on the nose. And as a read-alike, I'm going to say Forever, Judy Blume. Just because also it has a personal connection to me. I really remember sitting in grade 6 and having that book being passed around, like from desk to desk, like, secretly. Oh, yes, because
it was salacious.
Well, yeah, because, they have sex and it's all
Judy Blume,
which base is that?
And they name Michael's penis Ralph.
Come on now.
They do. And I just remember that sex, it wasn't described as being like something bad or this sort of moral conundrum, but it was described as something that also was very emotional, and the whole physicality of it as well. So because these were all the questions that one had as, okay, I was in grade 6, but, I did, it just sort of fueled all of those questions that I had. Yeah. So it was like this very kind of like, ooh, passing this along. And then, but also at the same time, the book Bear by Marian Engel was also being passed along.
Right, that one
passed around in school.
With the lady and the bear.
The erotic passages, particularly.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that would be not Bear, but Forever by Judy Blume would be a read-alike. Yes.
Whoa. So I'm going to tie it back to the beginning where I was talking about how Eleanor and Park, I thought, just had a wonderful name for a book. And so I think this is probably the book title that just has grabbed me. I think it's like the best book title of all time. It's I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, which I think is just a fantastic title. It's a semi-autobiographical book by Joan Greenberg, and it's all about a young woman and her battle with schizophrenia and the life that she creates inside her head to deal with the mental illness. And it was published in 1964. And so I feel like they probably didn't have a lot of books, dealing with that perspective at that time. And it is worth like every sentence in that book. I'm surprised that it's not more canonized than it is. I think it's fantastic. So
I like Shad's song, I Never Promised You a Rose Garden, too. It's a good one.
I've never heard it.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Okay, so now it's time for a special segment, Nerd Words for Word Nerds, the part of each show where each of our hosts picks a word, defines it, and then explains why it has been tickling their tongues for the past month. Who's going first?
I want to go last.
I'll go first.
I'll go second.
I think we should make Kirsten go first.
Because we're mean like that. I'm going to go first because mine is ellipses. And
God, I love ellipses.
Ellipses is a great word, and it's a great thing that the 3 dots at the end of a sentence. I chose it this month for a couple of reasons. One is that it's what comes up when you're texting somebody or when you're messaging somebody and they're writing back, and you can tell they're writing back. Right. And I love that.
Or when they stop and then nothing happens after the ellipses.
It means so much. Yes. It also happens to be at the beginning of each chapter in the Dialand book, the ellipses. And then the third reason is podcast specific, because it's actually it's 2-year anniversary of the day that I posted on Facebook, we should start thinking about proposing a library podcast. And Alan responded with, we should talk, ...
Those were his 3 words.
Yes, his 3 words, and then in ellipses. And I found that kind of threatening. I said, that sounds threatening. And he said, what I meant was, I've had that thought bouncing around in my head for a long time. How did you not get that from We Should Talk? And then I said, it was the ... And Alan said, ellipses? No, more like ominous harbingers of doom. And that is the beginning of the podcast.
Of Time to Read podcast.
Yes. So happy anniversary in a way.
That's awesome. Well, my word was inspired by a recent Reader's Salon blog post by Laura. And my word is serotonin. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter, and 90% of it is in our gut, even though we mostly think of it as being in our head, because it regulates mood, appetite, and sleep. It also affects cognitive functions like memory and learning. When you're feeling depressed or if you're feeling ill, then often it's a low amount of serotonin is in your brain. And one way to get around it is to take an antidepressant called an SSRI, or which is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. And so I'm just going to be quite honest here. I am not a pharmacist or a doctor. So the way that this works may be not right. But so you have neurons in your brain, and they're firing little things to other neurons, and the sort of the glue or the lubricant is the serotonin, because here it's sort of okay, here comes something, here comes an electrical thing, and the serotonin shows up, and then the message is passed, and then the serotonin goes away until the next firing. So it comes, and so the going away part is called reuptake. So what these antidepressants do is they block the reuptake so that the serotonin, it's going to go away. It's no, it's going to stick around. And so you slowly build up a little bit more serotonin, and then you start to feel better. So that's my word, serotonin.
Serotonin.
Beautiful sounding word. Science lesson for today.
Exactly. And serotonin would be the name of my main character if I ever wrote some fan fiction for Dr. Oliver Sacks. Serotonin.
Serotonin.
I'm going to cover it.
I always believe that daydreaming and doing lots of planning, even if it's actually not ever going to happen, that also naturally builds up serotonin in your brain and in your body.
We truly are holistic people, and there's not one way to your behavior changes your thoughts and your emotions change your thoughts and your behavior. It's all connected.
Your diet.
Exactly. So anyway, check out that Reader Salon blog post by Laura. It was a good one. It spoke to me.
Okay, so since Kirsten wants to go last, I'll go next. And since Erica was thinking that redheads have too much prominence, I will maybe knock them down a little. My word is redheaded stepchild.
No way! That's hilarious.
Which I don't think it's actually mentioned in the book, but Eleanor is essentially a redheaded stepchild. So it's a phrase that is derogatory, obviously, but I think it has a sound to it that is why it persists as a term. So I was like, where did it come from? And so it doesn't have a really great origin or a really defined origin. But back when people weren't as sure about how genetics work, if you were two people who didn't have red hair and you had a child and that child had red hair, there was some
questions about paternity.
So that's where the term redheaded stepchild comes from. So I thought it was appropriate because of the book.
Yes. Okay, so my nerd word, which is again nerd words, is custard tart or pastel de nata.
My gosh.
I just finished walking from Portugal to Spain, and Every day I ate pastel de nata, and they were so delicious, and I've been thinking about them daily, salivating. So these tarts were created in the 17th century by Catholic monks in a monastery in Lisbon, and at that time, convents and monasteries often used large quantities of egg whites for starching their clothes, like the nuns' habits and the collars. So it was quite common that then they would use the leftover egg yolks to make cakes and pastries. And that's how this particular delicacy was born. So then in 1820, the Liberal Revolution threatened to close many monasteries in Portugal. So the monks began selling their pastries in order to support their order. And when the monastery was closed in 1834, the monks sold their recipe to a sugar refinery that opened a bakery nearby. That bakery still exists today and sells those pastries with that same secret recipe that is prepared by only 6 master bakers who learned the recipe from the monks. The basic ingredients are super simple, but it's the proportions and the preparations that is what makes it secret. So the flaky pastry is filled with custard made of cream, egg yolks, sugar, flour, and lemon zest. The perfect egg tart should be at least 3 fingers wide and 2 fingers high. The crust should be thin and crispy, even when cold, and the filling should be creamy and not too sweet. And doesn't that sound so delicious? So to celebrate our birthday, I have brought some pastel de natas for our podcast team. Like, look at these beautiful.
We'll have to put a picture.
I'm so glad this is a visual medium.
I know. I can't help but always bring some visual aids to the podcast. Anyway, that is my word nerd word. Word nerd. Pastel de
I was going to
nata.
say, we're a really well-traveled group. You just were in Portugal and Spain. Erica, you're in England. Alan, you're in Cuba. And I spent one night over the Easter weekend in Brandon, Manitoba.
Go Brandon.
And you know what? I think we have some listeners in Brandon. So I just want to say Brandon's a great city.
Shout out to Brandon.
And if you ever want to see like livestock up close, you should really go to the Winter Fair. Go Wheat Kings. I saw a cow getting washed. And I'm not sure if I was supposed to be watching that or not, but I'm telling you, I don't think I've seen that anywhere else but in Brandon. So
you could also go to Yorkshire. There are cows everywhere.
But do they wash them?
I would assume, but I didn't see.
This thing was getting like a good workover, and it seemed happy for it, and the lady didn't seem to mind that I was watching.
I saw a shepherd with a bunch of cows on my walk, and the shepherd actually stopped and had to give me a big hug, and then No, it actually got a bit creepy and then started to like kiss me on my neck. I know I had to like hold him
man.
back.
Oh, we didn't even talk about creepy hugs in this book.
Oh,
that's too bad.
Oh, boy.
All right.
This book has so much to offer.
So much to offer. Okay, so thank you so much, dear readers, for joining us on our quinary voyage of the Time to Read podcast. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we have. Next month, we will be reading Fun Home, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechdel. Find it at your local Winnipeg Public Library branch and join our discussion on our website at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca or by emailing us at wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca. Remember to rate us on iTunes 5 stars. And until next time, make sure you find time to read.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Time to Read. We were discussing Eleanor and Park by Rainbow Rowell. Time to Read is a production of the Winnipeg Public Library. Your hosts today were Alan Chorney, Kirsten Werman, Erica Ball, and Trevor Lockhart. Our webmaster is Aaron Seaburn. Our social media guru is Regan Brew. Audio production and music by Dennis Penner. Some of our comments and questions today came from Chelsea, Michelle, Holly, Robin, Krista, Lynn, and Carrie. We want you to be part of our show too. Email us at wpl-podcast@winnipeg.ca with suggestions for books that you'd like us to read and discuss, and comments and questions about the book we're reading for our next show. Visit us on the web at wpl-podcast.winnipeg.ca. Check out our show notes with links to some of the things we talked about today, and take part in a discussion about the books we're reading. Unfortunately, we will not have pictures of Kirsten's custard tarts, as they were consumed before anyone thought to pull out a camera. Next month, we're reading Fun Home by Alison Bechdel. We're looking forward to hearing what you think.
time to read.